Marketing podcast is brought to you by me, Amanda Bear. We'll talk about topics that you don't normally read about in marketing literature that tell you more about the what, but not the how of marketing in the real world. You'll hear great conversations with leaders and up-and-comers who intersect with marketing and have been testing and learning and paving the way every day. Visit futurefitmarketing.com.au for access to resources and past episodes. Today I delve into some of the critical elements of marketing a B2B brand, particularly what it takes to build a brand with communications and advocacy. The fundamentals are the same as direct-to-consumer. You still need creativity, a good understanding of your target audience, and a plan to reach and convert. With many marketing technology solutions out there fighting in a growing and competitive landscape, how do businesses like Adobe in Australia maintain market share and continue to grow relevance? I speak to Pauline Linton, Head of Brand Communications and Advocacy for APAC at Adobe. Pauline has been working in communications and digital for over 15 years, kicking off her career in fundraising and communications at Inspire Foundation Reachout.com, an online youth mental health service. She then went agency side, joining Edelman Australia to help build their social media capabilities nationally, applying some of her expertise to the content and social media strategies of some of Australia's leading brands, including Telstra, Gumtree, Adobe and PayPal. Pauline then joined Adobe as their head of social media in APAC, and today her remit has expanded to oversee brand communications and advocacy across Adobe's business units in APAC. I have the pleasure to introduce you all to Pauline Linton, who is the head of brand communications and advocacy of Asia Pacific for Adobe. Welcome, Pauline.
Thank you. Great to be here. Great to be chatting to you again.
Why don't we get started? Why don't you share us a little bit about your background and some of your career highlights and then your job at Adobe?
Yeah, great. I might take it back to, where it all began many years ago. I studied economics and social science, and I didn't actually realize how important that was until a lot later on in my career, especially when I think about, the importance of critical thinking and diversity of thinking and how, sort of understanding how to research and what's insightful and what's interesting. And then as part of my studies, I did a lot of the kind of social foundations of economics, so how people fit into economic models and things like that. So obviously there's no obvious path to a direct sort of career after that, but I don't have any kind of communications or marketing training from the very beginning. But as part of my degree, I actually did an internship with the Inspire Foundation, which I loved, and that was a youth mental health organization, really progressive at the time, first to have online forums, first to be kind of purely digital. And so off the back of my internship, luckily they offered me a job, and I started in the communications team, writing grants for funding, for fundraising. And then one thing led to another, and I was there for about 6 years working in a bunch of communications and marketing roles. And when I sort of wrapped up my time at Reach Out, I was working in social media and working on their community forums, which was, social media back then. And then I just sort of got to a point where, I'd been there for 6 years, my first job. It was time to do something a little bit different. And I jumped over into agency land. And I, with a focus on social media and really kind of digital channels and platforms, worked across a bunch of really awesome clients in a variety of social, digital content roles for about another 5 or 6 years. And then, finally I was poached by one of my favorite clients and went over to client side working for Adobe. And when I started there, again, it was head of social media for the APAC region. And then, it felt not amateur, but it kind of felt like early 2000s to be talking about social media on its own. So my role kind of evolved to be a little bit more kind of brand communications, and now brand comms and advocacy. So it's thinking about social media in the context of communications channels more broadly, and where are audiences, how are they consuming your information and interacting with your brand. So a much more sort of holistic role. And if I go back to what I studied, obviously there was some marketing and comms training throughout the years, but really understanding how people fit into technology and fit into society, and how we all interact with each other and information is more relevant today than it has ever been. So that's my not so long but kind of long enough career journey in a nutshell.
Amazing. And I think with both your agency experience and then Adobe experience being at the forefront from a technology standpoint, you've got a chunky leadership role now. What sort of technical skills and leadership capabilities have you been able to develop over time, and what's really critical to your role?
Yeah, it's communications is a contextual business, right? So context is everything, and communication sort of fundamentals and really understanding how information spreads, everything from kind of feedback loops to what makes the news, to what makes ideas sticky, to the technology that's changing, that changes that every single day. There's a lot that I've had to learn and that I think is really critical. And part of it is kind of, understanding the nitty gritty and understanding technology and how the technology works, from kind of being in the weeds to then also really not losing those fundamentals of what is a good story, what do people care about, being audience first, and thinking about audience specific comms. And as I mentioned, when I started my role in kind of social media at Reach Out, it was around 2008. So although it was in social media, Facebook was really new. Spent a lot of time working in online forums at the outset, so I really understood the technical components and the nitty gritty of their technology, from kind of setting up rooms, getting to a critical mass, and then breaking out into kind of smaller forums, and all of that stuff. Now I think having the knowledge of the technology helps you to make much more informed decisions. Not to say that I spend my days, on Facebook or on Instagram, but once you understand technology, it really helps you to be a lot more, kind of strategic in decision making. You understand what roles you need on your team, how the roles all kind of intersect and work together, but then where you sort of need to step back and have a more overarching view, how certain channels interact with each other, from brand and thought leadership to more kind of specific performance-based channels. So from a technical point of view, it was really immersing myself in digital channels, and I'm talking about social media in that context, but there's also understanding how websites are set up, how blog posts are set up, how you can understand and measure kind of metrics and your audience behavior on those channels. So really kind of diving into technology and having that strong technical knowledge. But then on the flip side, there's also from a more leadership point of view, it's really knowing that the future of talent is potential, and no one I was hiring had, well, not no one, but many of them hadn't done it before, or what we were about to do next week or next month hadn't been done if there was a new channel. So really planning for potential and for opportunity, which is challenging to do. And I think the more technical knowledge you have, the easier it is for you to, this is a huge generalization, but roughly speaking, anticipate, sort of what's to come and know what sort of skill set you need to get there. And then with that, obviously, there's being flexible and being really adaptable. but without solid foundations and, understanding kind of the fundamentals of communications and kind of understanding technology, it's hard to be flexible and adaptable, and then you almost become sort of reactive. So being flexible within the context of solid sort of fundamentals across comms and more technical skills. And then I think it's fair to say that over the last few years, marketers have all had to understand data a lot more, and really know what the numbers mean, but also how do you tell a story with those numbers? And I feel like a lot of people say that, but you can tell a million stories from, a million data points. True. What are the ones that are going to help you add more value to the business, create more impact for your customer, grow your team, grow your budgets, grow your resources? So not just kind of getting buried in numbers, but thinking about what's the story that you want to tell and how can those numbers kind of support that. So they're probably the key ones, planning for sort of potential, being flexible, and then knowing what story you want to tell and the right numbers to help you tell that.
I love what you said there around planning for future talent. I think that's a really interesting one. And as a marketer, you have to have, it's table stakes to have the foundations around data, and the better knowledge you have around technology, tick, fantastic. But the anticipation of what future needs are is I think, a super interesting topic, right? And I'm curious to understand, with the recruits that you have been looking at over the past couple of years, how do you actually anticipate that? And then how do you find the right person? What is that sort of secret sauce as you're going through that interview process?
Yeah. Look, if I knew exactly what that secret sauce was, I would have written a book about it. I would be on a book tour. I think, even just identifying what potential looks like in a recruit is a lot more kind of attitudinal than it is experience and results-based. And I'll ask, questions around what content they're consuming, what platforms they're on, where they think the future of social media is. And it's really in a lot of it is in kind of the energy and the attitude. And if they're excited about the future and have a point of view, whether or not I agree with it or it's aligned to mine is kind of irrelevant. But I think, the potential really comes from a little bit of obviously the experience of what they've done in the past, not just in their, in a professional context, but also kind of personally. Are you on social media channels? What websites, are you visiting? What are you reading? Where are you getting your information? What have you studied? What do you understand about, about society? What do you understand about it, telling a good story? What do you understand about the news? What's important? Where are you kind of consuming your information? And it's almost in that conversation, I think as well, it's bringing that diversity of thinking and that diversity of experience. And it's always been it's not even chemistry as much as it is having the right attitude and then just being driven. I think it's, we not that we no longer need a safe pair of hands. A safe pair of hands is really important for a bunch of different jobs. But when you're thinking about a social strategist, a content strategist, you really want someone that's excited and motivated and driven and is also anticipating what's to come. And when I'm thinking about, what the future holds and the opportunity and what's next for social and digital and content, I don't know. So as much as we can get other people that are thinking about that, we can kind of throw our ideas into the ring and and see what kind of surfaces. And I try to do that in a really condensed way in an interview process, because when I'm interviewing, it's not what do you know and what can you tell me? It's how do you think and how are you constantly challenging yourself to think differently? So really knowing that they're constantly feeding themselves with interesting stimulus, but also thinking ahead and not kind of being, too complacent and too, sort of technically capable. So yeah, I think it's, like I said, it's not a secret sauce, but the process is really just trying to condense what we would do in a work setting into a interview setting and getting a sense for how they think.
That's really good advice, actually, that sort of forward thinking, think about attitude versus just the past. Really good advice. I'm going to change it up a bit and talk about and ask you about Adobe specifically. And I think the technology category has been beaten up quite a lot the last couple of years, and obviously post-COVID. And many tech companies are experiencing pretty challenging times, with growth, with staff, etc. How have your teams had to adapt?
We've been really lucky working for Adobe. We haven't had any, mass layoffs and things like that, which I'm very grateful for. And as an organization, there's been a really strong focus over the last couple of years around really looking after our teams and our talent. And I think a big part of that and how we've made it through is cutting the fat. So there's a bunch of stuff that we were doing, whether it's kind of, testing and learning, put a little bit of resources here, see where this lands, to just what are the top, 3 to 5 things that we're doing that have the most impact? What's the one thing we're going to do this quarter or this half, and how we're going to really understand not only how the landscape is changing for us as a tech company, but our very varied audiences, from artists and content creators to CMOs and CTOs. How's their their landscape changing? What's going to cut through what everyone else is doing, and how are we going to get the greatest impact for our customers and for our teams? And it's really meant focusing. What's our point of difference? What differentiates us? What's, the most impactful we can be? And I feel like you hear this a lot, but it's doing more with less. Mm-hmm. And it's, not to say that we've had huge resource cuts, but we've just been thinking about, you kind of just need to do what works. For the past few years, we had been doing a little more around testing and innovating and iterating. And it's not to say that we don't do that anymore, but it's in a bit more kind of considered way around what do we know works, and how we just going to focus on that impact for our customers and for our teams.
You talk about doing more with less and making sure that you're doing the tried and true things really well. And I guess part and parcel of that is about creativity as well, right? So that's such an important part of your role. Can you talk through some of the foundations that you have built and applied?
Yeah, creativity is so intimidating to talk about when you work for Adobe, because people are like, oh, you work for Adobe, you must be so creative. And obviously anyone who knows our kind of marketing stack knows that we're a lot more than that. But actually creativity is what we do, and it's one of it's in our DNA, and it's who we are at Adobe. So I thought that I had to be really creative to truly model the brand. But of course, working across B2B and B2C audiences, creativity really, kind of varies, and what it means to be creative looks quite different. So I've learned over the years and kind of applied over the years, how do we find a model that allows you to be creative in a relatively risk-free way as a brand and test different creative styles? And where I kind of got to with that is putting the quote unquote creativity in the hands of our customers. Mm-hmm. So creativity it's not about, new colors and styles, but how we're joining new dots, so to speak, to show people something that's unexpected and exciting. Now, working for a global company in a regional role, we're also looking at, what's the universal, messaging and activity that a global team can do. And then in the region, where I need to be creative is a purely regional lens. So telling stories, creating content that we can only do in the region. So the creativity came through, we're going to put the content in the hands of our audiences. And I'll talk to this for B2C first and then B2B. 98% of our our social and content strategy on the B2C side in my team for brand comms is influencer and creator content. Okay. So we partner with our customers at the very beginning to define what a brief is going to look like. Our influencers and content creators and the artists that we work with and the designers help us shape what do you want to see and how can we bring that to you in a brand. And then also the majority of the content that we develop, when I say we, it's really our community, that create that content. And so over in Q1, our Q1, we ran a Lunar New Year campaign, and 100% of the content that was created was influencer content, and 100% of the media was promoting influencer channels. And we saw engagement rates on Instagram of something like 46%. So absolutely unheard of in my entire career. But it's because what was creative was actually asking our audience what resonates with them, partnering, with them, and kind of co-creating throughout the entire process, and then really relying on them to be the creative ones, because they are. And then on the B2B side, our customers and our advocates are really our influencers. So being creative on the B2B side is completely changing our strategy to elevate our customers as influencers and partner with them to create content that positions, that gives us a bit of an outside in view. So I love what my team does, because we're not just Adobe, and this is what Adobe does, but it's getting the view of what are our customers thinking, and what are they working on, what are they worried about, what are they excited about, and partnering with them to create that content. Now, it might, how you're creative when you're talking about a customer data platform is very different to how you can be creative when you're talking about Photoshop and Illustrator. But it's really just about creating something that is unexpected but interesting for either one of your audiences or for all of your audiences. So the creativity really comes from asking out, kind of partnering with our customers to find out what they want, and then putting that creation or co-creation in their hands.
So it sounds like you've got quite a diversity of audience and obviously quite a diversity of product as well. And so a few different tension points. One is around how do you prioritize all of that? And then obviously, how do you then gain your fair share? What are some of the things that you might do around sort of segmentation and research and obviously getting your fair share of cut through?
Yeah, it's the $1 million question, isn't it? Like, how do I split my time amongst these audiences? And behind the work that I do, there are teams of people that are doing more kind of performance-based marketing. So I'm not going to suggest that I'm necessarily doing all of this, but in terms of how I split my time, a lot of it really, comes down to our opportunity within markets and our total, kind of addressable market, budgets and resources that we have to kind of work with throughout the quarter, but also being really intentional about the channels and the strategies that we use to engage our B2B and B2C audiences. And if I come back to the context piece and the importance of context in communications for our B2C audiences, they might be purchasing our products or engaging with our products in their in their kind of personal channels and not necessarily professionals, whereas for our B2B audiences, they're very much looking for content that is in line with their kind of professional career. So we're looking at an Instagram versus LinkedIn, and so we're not trying to reach all of our audiences across all of our channels with hyper targeted content for a B2B marketer on Instagram. Not to say that they're not there, but we're with limited resources, we're just trying to focus on, okay, how do we be really smart about what do our audience want, how can we deliver it to them, and what's the best context for them to receive that information. The other thing is if I jump over to the B2B side for a second, it's also from a brand point of view, understanding that 95/5 rule where, your potential buyers aren't ready to buy 95% of the time. So how do we think about not kind of segmenting our brand and thought leadership content so much so that they only see it when they're in the market to buy, but how are we constantly building our sort of brand reputation, and telling the stories that they need to hear throughout the year or whatever it is. And then also understanding who is in the buying committee, and they might be at a range of different levels and want to be hearing really different things from us at a different point in time. And I think from a resource point of view, we can't have 50 different messages going out to 10 different people across the buying committee for 95% of the time and then 5% of the time. So we need to be really smart about what do we want our audiences. And again, I'll just kind of say this is coming from a brand comms point of view, and our performance teams, I'm sure, are hyper targeting and segmenting to the T, but thinking about how can we efficiently and effectively create brand communications, we definitely need to have a more kind of holistic view of that buying committee, and also what their buying cycle might look like when they're ready and when they're not. And we partner with our performance marketing team to do a bit of a brand to demand targeting strategy where, depending on how you've engaged with our brand content, you might be retargeted with different demand content. But we're also trying not to go too broad, because the reality is not every marketer is going to buy Adobe Experience Cloud. They don't need all of our capabilities. So trying to get a real sense for who is our buyer, who are the brands that we care about, who are our customers, and our prospects, and then try to create content that is going to make them feel like Adobe is a trusted partner. They're doing really great work with other customers, some my partners, some my competitors, but they're innovative, they're forward thinking, they understand my audience, they understand my customer, and then create content that kind of resonates a little more broadly than thinking about being too hyper targeted.
What's been most important to your success?
I think it's being good to work with most of the time. A lot of and I mentioned to you earlier that I'm embarking on a leadership training course as we speak, and some of the feedback that I've received is, I'm very collaborative and generally have a really kind of positive energy. And I think it's been quite important when you're working in this environment where there's a lot of change is a constant. It's important that your energy is also, and your positivity is also a constant in that, because change is constant, but it's not always good. So just maintaining being a nice person to work with, and being mostly collaborative and positive. But also I think what's been really important is the journey from working in an environment in youth mental health, understanding the importance and the value of communications delivered to the right people at the right time, then working in an agency environment across a range of different clients who are at a range of different kind of maturity levels in their brands and in their business, being able to work on a small SMB to a multinational, and working with a bunch of different sizes and shapes of comms and marketing teams, and then now working at Adobe, I kind of feel like I have that. I'm working in an agency again, because I work across B2B, B2C with a bunch of different business units and a bunch of different stakeholders. So also just being able to work in quite a matrix organization has been quite, really important. It's been really helpful to have that experience working in B2B and B2C, working with a bunch of different people, working in a bunch of different regions. So I don't know what's been most important to my success. I guess the diversity of stuff that I've done, because if we go back to the beginning and anticipating what's to come, the more, the more you have, you've experienced, or the more stimulus, the more it helps you kind of prepare for, and anticipate what's next. And also just have fun doing it. I mean, we work in communications and marketing, not to say that it's not serious work, but I try, to really enjoy the process, which I think is quite important.
Well said.
I've answered your question.
No, you have perfectly. It's great. It's great. Now, we always close out with this question, and it's about staying future fit. And I'm curious about the resources and the tips and things that you have to stay future fit with your career.
Yeah. So there are two books that I love and that I think about almost every single day in terms of what I do and how I work. And one of them is Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. And that's all about making, how you make messages sticky. And there are so many great anecdotes and examples and in kind of experiments in there that I apply to the way that my my messaging kind of resonates as a manager, as a leader, but also as a communicator and marketer. So if you work in this space, having those really solid kind of communications fundamentals that I talk about, you have to read this book. It is awesome. And then the other one is Show Your Work. And I think it's by Austin Kleon or something like that. And it's all about sharing, being a bit of an open book and sharing your thinking and sharing your working out, and showing how you got to an idea, and not sort of trying to hold on to everything until it's perfect and then, putting it out there. And it's, really about how do you bring people along for the journey, show how you got to where you are, iterate, get feedback, get input, and then, ultimately build a better product or experience, or whether that's for your team or for your customer. So they're two books that I love and would highly recommend any communications or marketing professional to read. And then the other one is Immerse Yourself in New Technology, because understanding technology helps you to understand your potential. And for example, you'd have to be living underground for a decade to not have heard about AI, and especially Gen AI, and especially, some announcements that Adobe have made over the last week. But whenever there are these new kind of advancements in technology, make sure you really understand them and immerse yourself in them. And there are a bunch of Instagram pages on on AI and sharing the latest news in the the metaverse and whatnot that I follow. And so really understanding where the technology is, whether it's in your industry or not. I look at a lot of where gaming companies how they're using technology, and that helps you understand the potential in your own industry. So, don't be afraid to get on the tools, to go down rabbit holes, to really understand technology and understand its potential.
Thank you, Pauline, for jumping on the podcast. Really appreciate your openness and your energy. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Always lovely to chat to you.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard, share this podcast series with someone else, and thanks for paying it forward.